research located in Lyon. And I'm also the coordinator of this Agroecology for You project. And my background is I'm coming from Germany, so I know also a little bit about agroecology in Germany, as we want to present today some results about the mapping of agroecology in Austria and in Germany. Yeah, maybe next slide, Baptiste, or with moving Kira, okay. So just a quick overview about the different persons which were registered for this webinar. Well, we will see how many will really then connect. That's always the same thing. But while many from Germany, France, Austria, Belgium, and then you see from many other countries all over Europe. So there's an interest now to see a little bit what's going on in these different, in these two countries we are speaking about today, but there will be, of course, a follow-up with more webinars and later, and we will come back to this at the end of the presentation. Next, please. And we have also different stakeholders, stakeholder groups. So it's dominant with the researchers. There are also students, there are different people working for an NGO. Also funder is present, or some farmers and farmers advisors and policymakers. So we are very happy that we could attract a large diversity of stakeholders. Next, please. So we will I'm still on the way giving a small introduction and then also about the Agroecology for EU project. Do you still hear me, Kira? Because maybe I switch off my camera. I just switch off my camera because I saw that my internet is unstable. So yes, and then we will have the main presentation about the results from the mapping of agroecology in Austria and Germany, and then having also from another person an outlook on the development of agroecology in Germany from another project which we could invite, which is our sister project. And then of course we want to discuss with you and having more exchange. Next slide, please. So in the name of Agroecology for You project, so that's a Horizon 2020 coordination and support action project over 3 years with 12 partners from 10 different countries. And one of the main goals is to build a European agroecological network, or to support the building of a European agroecological network to speed up the transition towards sustainable agriculture and food. Next slide, please. So we defined 6 key objectives in the for the whole project. Well, on the one side, to increase these connections between different actors. Then more specifically, also develop skills and methods for developing different research infrastructure and living labs, to prepare also the funders for increased and complementary funding of agroecology. Fourth would be to improve human and social capital. Then improve capacity to tailor policy interventions to specific situations, and then also develop in the medium and long-term research innovations projects initiatives, and at least to initiate this from the project side. Yeah. Next, please. So to put it in a larger frame, so the whole thing around the Agroecology partnership, which was started in 2020 with first webinars organized by the DG Agris. Then there were the start of the partnership co-creation with the so-called SCAR Agroecology group, so the Standing Committee of Agricultural Research, and a special group which is dedicated to agroecology, the European Commission, and the 2 CSA, so these 2 projects which are already in Agroecology for You, and different stakeholders, and I see some of them are present today here. And normally this should end up in a call in 2023 for organizing and governing this partnership in agroecology, living labs and research infrastructure, and then the partnership should start in 2024. Next slide, please. Yes, and then for the mapping, I will hand over the word to Baptiste because he's leading and coordinating the mapping together with me. So we will introduce more shortly a little bit in the methodology and what is carried out before then we come really to the results from Germany and Austria.
Yes, thanks, Alexander. So hi, everyone. Very happy to be with you for the first webinar, public webinar of our project. So we wanted to share with you the, let's say, the main elements regarding the methodology that we use for the mapping of agroecology. So to start with what are our goals. We had two main goals with what we call the mapping. First, to have an overview of the development of agroecology in different European countries, and also be able to analyze and document different initiatives that are more or less directly linked to agroecology. In this work, and that's why we put it also in the slide, we do not aim to be exhaustive, but rather illustrative to have a general overview of the development of agroecology, and we aim to do it in 23 countries. And as you will see, the work is ongoing for the moment. So, of course, as a basis of our work, we took into consideration the existing knowledge and bibliography. So one, we can cite the previous work from the Association Agroecology Europe, with the mapping also of agroecology in Hungary, different research articles that were published, or the TIFA initiatives, which was a project on the 10 years of agroecology, which also document different initiatives in some European countries. So in our work, one of the things that you will see is that we use the three pillars of agroecology, so movement, practice, and science and research, to categorize the information that we collect and link to the context that Alexander was explaining, and link also to the fact, for instance, that many training and education initiatives were not always linked to science and research, which used to add two pillars, so two complementary pillars that are living lab, we'll come back to that, and also training and education. So the goal here was to try to categorize initiatives and also, as you will see, informants regarding their knowledge and expertise on the different pillars, knowing that, of course, some initiative could be linked to one or more pillars in our work. So you here each time have an example of what could be initiatives that are linked to the movement pillar, to the practice of farmers, farmer groups, living labs, or science and research as well, here as the example. So first thing to have in mind, you will find it later in the presentation. And second thing to have in mind, we use two key notions. First, the notion of key informants, that could be defined as experts that provided information or one or more of the pillars that I just mentioned. So key informants could be representative of NGO, researcher, or any other person that have an area of expertise linked to agroecology. And the second key notion that we use is this word of initiatives, which could be defined as formal action led by formal or informal organization towards agroecology. So as you will see, and Anna will present you some example for Germany and Austria. This could be programs, it could be project, this could be initiative, could be also living labs, could be social movements. So there is a wide diversity of what we call initiatives. So having these two key notions in mind, just to briefly explain you the methodology that we use. So in the first step, we define our methodological approach. So of course, taking into account, as I said, the bibliography, as well as defining some key notion, the questionnaire, also the grid of interview that we use. In the second step that is still a bit going on, we mapped agroecology in different countries through a network of mappers that work in the different countries, leading to an analysis at the country level and also at regarding country initiatives. And thanks mainly to semi-structured interview of key informants and also initiative leader and desktop research, we have tried to design what we call country report that summarize the information per country. And then we aim at doing some dissemination, so through this webinar, for example, and we, as you will see at the end, we also aim to publish a different volume of open access book to summarize and share the information that we collect in this work. So just before I give the floor to Anna, A short overview of our progress. So as I was saying, we aim to map agroecology in 23 countries. And for the moment, we have data and we have done the work on 14 countries, which represent a bit more than 100 key informants, more than 100 also initiatives, with 27 mappers that are already involved. So the mappers, just to be clear, are the ones that lead the work in each country. To show you a bit geographically, where do we do the mapping? So we show you here the results for Germany and Austria, but as you can see, there is a wide diversity of country concerned. So from Portugal to Greece, Bulgaria, Sweden, also UK. So in total, as I was saying, 23 countries in Europe. Two last things that we wanted to share with you regarding the overall results of the mapping. So it's only preliminary results for the moment. But to provide you an overview of the expertise of key informants, so based on the results on the 14 countries, and so a bit more than 100 key informants that we had, as you can see, there is quite an equal distribution of expertise around the different pillars, except for living labs. But so 38% of our key informant had an area of expertise linked to the practice pillar, 36% linked to the science and research pillar, and then training, education, and movement. So quite an equal distribution regarding their area of expertise, at least on the 4 pillars that you see here. And regarding the initiative, so the type of action, the area of action, sorry, that they have, and the pillar they could be linked with. The main one with the main initiatives that we found, 64% of initiatives were linked to the practice pillar, then 53% to the training and education pillar, and then 43% to the movement. So you can see here that this was the 3 main pillars, and then we found less initiative linked to with an area of action linked to the science and research pillar and to the living lab pillar. So we'll come back to that. This was just to provide you an overview of what we do, the main methodological step. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Anna Brümmer, that has worked with us mainly during her master thesis, and that has led the mapping for Germany and Austria.
Thank you, Baptiste. So I'm Anna, and I'm going to present the results of the mapping in Austria and Germany that I did, as Baptiste said, during my master thesis. So I conducted around 45 interviews. You will see in the next slide an overview with key informants and representatives of initiatives that in those interviews were conducted between March and July of last year. Most interviews were done online or over the phone. And in the beginning of the whole project, we established a common interview grid where key informants, there were 2 types of interviews conducted, some with key informants, where the interview consisted of questions on their personal use and understanding of the term agroecology. And then a first part was dedicated to questions on existing initiatives in each pillar, and a second part on the state of agroecology in the country. So the interviews for the initiatives were actually a bit shorter and included general questions on the aim, the development, and the stakeholders involved in the initiatives. So on the left here, you can see the map and overview of the geographical distributions of initiatives and key informants. My aim was to find initiatives in all parts of both countries and have at least 1 key informant per pillar. So I had in total 8 key informants in Austria, whereas 5 of them were working in chambers of agriculture. And in Germany, they were 13, and the majority were scientists and professors at university. And then I selected 9 initiatives in Austria and 15 in Germany. So I will present the results of both countries in parallel to put them in perspective. And I will start with an understanding in the development of agroecology in both countries per pillar, and then I will discuss the results per pillar and show some examples of initiatives. So all key informants actually use the term agroecology in their work, and in Austria, the majority defined the concept as a practice. In Germany, the majority, 10 out of 13, defined it as a science, where some of them considered it to be a movement and a science, and 3 of them used the threefold definition of science, practice, and movement. In both countries, key informants referred to organic agricultures in their definition already. So in Austria, the two that used organic agriculture to define agroecology equivalated actually the two concepts. And in Germany, they mentioned that organic agriculture is either included in agroecology or that agroecology is based on the principles of organic agriculture. All key informants mentioned organic agriculture then later during the interview, but not all, as I said, used the the concept already in the definition. Then there were only 3 key informants in Germany that also talked about the intrinsic property of agroecology as a transformative process of food systems. And finally, in both countries, key informants defined the concept as a systemic approach, taking into account the complexity and levels of the whole food system. Next, you will see that overall, the key informants said that the term itself is not commonly used, except by researchers and scientists studying the interactions and relationships in an ecosystem, so including the influence of humans on the environment. However, the research was presented as being very fragmented, and the findings are not always linked to develop practices, agroecological practices. And there are some social movements and NGOs that are using the concept of agroecology. So, for example, during the European Food Sovereignty Forum in Austria, or recently there was the publication of a position paper to strengthen agroecology in Germany. As I said before, all key informants talked about organic farming playing an important role in both countries. And a quarter of Austria's agricultural surfaces are certified organic. And this is Austria has really a pioneer role in Europe. And in Germany, it's around 10% of organic agricultural surfaces that are certified organic. And just as a reminder, the EU aims to through its farm to fork strategy, that the goal of 25% will be reached in 2030 for all European countries. In Austria, all key informants mentioned the agri-environmental program named ÖPUL. And this is a program that contains around 24 measures that aim to protect biodiversity and promote, among other, organic farming. In Germany, there were quite a few strategies and policies that were mentioned to favor the implementation of agroecology, and you can see the list on the bottom right. Key informants mentioned in both countries that the awareness around agroecology is rising, and that the consequences of conventional farming, climate change, and also the corona pandemic are leading to changes in consumption habits in both countries. So next I will talk about the first pillar, the movement pillar. A few movements use the concept of agroecology and link it to socially fair and sustainable production. And the term is recognized by the organizations I listed here in the table below, but it is not often at the heart of these movements. There are specific organizations that focus on organic farming like Bio Austria, Demeter, and Bioland. And then there's organizations like the ÖBV Via Campesina or the Nieleni branch in Austria that were mentioned by many of the key informants for their focus on food sovereignty. Then there's also community-supported agriculture that has been expanding in both countries. I found a list of 40 initiatives in Austria and 362 CSA schemes in Germany. And then there's also the Wir haben es satt movement in Germany, which means we are fed up. And it focuses on agriculture, environmental, animal, and consumer protection. And it is known for organizing a lot of big demonstrations in Germany, asking for a paradigm shift in agriculture. So next, you will see a further example of type of movement, and that's the emergence of food policy councils, which aim to involve citizens in decision processes in food systems. And the food policy councils are promoting local, sustainable, and fair food supply. I interviewed the food councils of Vienna and of Frankfurt, and both have different working groups on production of sustainable food, on reducing food waste, on urban agriculture, alternative market chains, public food procurement, and also nutritional awareness raising and education. The amount of people involved in both projects fluctuates a lot. So you can see in Vienna, there were around 40 people currently active, and in Frankfurt, 150. And all of the members are actually volunteers. So the impact these initiatives have depends on the motivation and the work of these volunteers. Then we can go to the next pillar, the Living Lab pillar, which is we could say an emerging type of initiatives. Most key informants could not name any living lab, and the initiatives themselves did not always identify as such. So most living labs that I could list are quite recent, and certain networks like demonstration networks or model ecoregions, which exist in both Austria and Germany, can be considered to further develop living labs. The example I chose here to illustrate here is the initiative called Grassland Biotope Network in the next slide. And it is a project aiming to stabilize and maintain and develop species diversity in northwestern Germany. For this, pilot regions were selected and specific management plans were established. It's a 3-year project that already finished, and it involves around 150 stakeholders, including regional government, researchers, road construction management enterprises, water and soil associations, and many rural associations. And of course, farmers. The Grassland Center of Lower Saxony is the entity conducting the project, coordinating the project, and it's still continuing to the work of maintaining and linking the biotopes that were created. And then there's also the University of Oldenburg, which is involved and is continuing to scientifically monitor the areas. So the project was actually quite innovative in its cooperative approach, as it linked many stakeholders together towards a common goal. Next, I will present you an initiative in the practice pillar called Result-Oriented Nature Conservation Planning, which is a project around the agri-environmental measure, giving farmers the possibility to determine their own conservation actions to achieve specific results regarding biodiversity. And this result-oriented approach is actually quite different from most of the list of strict measures that are subsidized. The concrete goals, like creating nesting places for certain species, for example, are established by an advisor together with the farmer in a first site inspection step. And then specific control criteria are explained to enable the farmers to link their practice to the expected results. In the current phase, there's around 150 farmers involved and 12 advisors that are all over Austria. And the initiatives works at the interface phase of agriculture and ecology and aims to adapt the agri-environmental measures. The concept itself of agroecology is not really used in that initiative. Next, we'll go to the science pillar. So key informants could name many institutions and research groups in Germany and Austria. You can see here a list of different research institutions in the tables. And they all are working on agroecology related topics such as biological control, organic farming practices, agroecological practices, biodiversity conservation, also agriculture under climate change, or the evaluation of agro-environmental schemes. Then there's also many universities that were named for Austria. We can name the University of Life Science called BOKU, which has a department on sustainable agricultural systems with a specific division on organic farming. Then there's the University of Innsbruck that has a research group in the Institute of Sociology and they were specifically in the field of rural development and on food systems. And then there's also the University of Vienna, which has multiple divisions working on related topics such as the terrestrial ecosystem research and of Department of Botany and Biodiversity. In Germany, the key informant listed around 14 universities to work on different related topics and mentioned that the research is very fragmented in subtopics. So here I'm just going to cite a few. There was the University of Göttingen that was mentioned many times, and the University of Hohenheim, which works on, among other subjects, on the ecology of tropical agricultural systems. And the University of Kassel-Witzenhausen, which is specialized in organic agricultural sciences. Next, you will see that we were also interested in the focus of publications in both countries. So I did a Web of Science search using keywords related to agroecology. And we found that articles with the topic of organic farming are the most numerous since 1990. The first scientific article on agroecology in Germany was published in 1993, and for Austria it was in 2000. And there's a clear trend since 2018 of an increasing number of papers having agroecology as topic. So interesting also to notice is that the number of articles on agroforestry is especially high in Germany, where I found over 671 articles on agroforestry. Next, I will present to you a project called Franz, which is a long-term project over 10 years. It aims to find and develop biodiversity promoting solutions. So in this project, there are 10 farms distributed throughout Germany. You can see the map there on the left. And each farm was chosen as typical for the region. Overall, there are 40 stakeholders involved in the project, and there's also 1 to 2 advisors per farms and 5 research institutes that work on the project, and a total of 13 farmers. This project developed different blooming and extensification measures, for example. In total, 16 measures were established for grassland and for arable land. And the ecological effects of the measures are analyzed, and target organisms are monitored throughout the project. And there's also a analysis of socioeconomic and cost investigation. The result of the project will be used to provide policy recommendations. And now we can go to the last pillar, the education and training pillar. Many courses and degrees related to agroecology exist in both countries. For example, the University of Life Science in Vienna offers many courses related to agroecology and a master's degree on organic agricultural systems and agroecology. Then there's the University of Göttingen, which has several courses in the bachelor degree of agricultural sciences that are related to agroecology. And there's also the University of Kassel-Witzenhausen, which offers a degree in organic agriculture already since 1995. So there's many more, the list continues, but I won't describe them all here. What I wanted to say is that universities are, of course, not the only place that agroecology is taught, and trainings for adults and also children from all ages exist, and they often have a specific focus like organic agriculture or permaculture. For example, organizations like Austria or Demeter offer trainings on different related topics. The majority of initiatives I interviewed aim to raise awareness and educate on agroecology related topics, so most of them would actually fit in this pillar. The initiative I selected here that I'm going to present is the Permaculture Academy in the southeast of Austria. It's a training facility on permaculture, which has lectures and practice and guided tours where the courses actually take place. There's a basic training of permaculture that is proposed, And this training comprises 4 modules. The first one is on self-sufficiency, then there's a module on living and constructing, a module on social permaculture, well, local currency or exchange rings are presented, and then the 4th module is on agriculture. Yes, and that's all for this initiative. And next I'm going to present the barriers for the development of agroecology. These were the barriers mentioned by the key informants. So most key informants named the economic barriers first. The fact that food prices are considered to be too low and not taking into account externalities. Also the fact that farmers are often not remunerated enough for their efforts. There's also a lack of knowledge or lack of data on the economic benefits of agroecology. Key informants said that these are not analyzed enough. And these barriers, the economic barriers, can be linked to the political framework barriers. And most key informants said that there are no policies directly promoting agroecology in those 2 countries. And there's also a high administrative burden that goes with most policies and funding programs. In both countries, key informants mentioned missing awareness and education. And this concerns all of society, also including farmers who lack sometimes of know-how to implement agroecological practices. Then another barrier mentioned was the opposition between nature conservation and agriculture, which leads to conflicts between ecologists and farmers. That was a point that was mostly mentioned in Germany. In Germany, there were also key informants that started saying that the first barrier that needed to be overcome was the lack of a common definition of agroecology. And a few also talked about missing scientific knowledge. In Austria, there was also a further barrier mentioned, which was the land use, as agricultural lands continues to be used for more lucrative purposes like energy production, for example. Finally, I will conclude. So throughout my work, it became clear that agroecology is understood in very different ways. The clarification of the concept would be a necessary first step to further develop agroecology. Then organic agriculture plays a key role in both countries, and policies that are considered to promote agroecology mainly focus on organic farming. So further development of agroecology should actually be done on this. In terms of science, research was presented as being very fragmented in many specific subtopics. Overall, very few initiatives use the term agroecology, but I can say that most follow agroecological principles. The initiatives selected, they have very different impacts on the food system, mostly due to their scale and level of ambition, but overall they aim to change the food system and make it more sustainable and fairer by involving all concerned stakeholders in the process. For further development of agroecology in both countries, key informants mentioned many barriers that have already been identified in other studies, and these need to be overcome. And there's also a lot of solutions or ways of development that are presented by scientists. Raising awareness is key, of course, to accelerate this transition. And all key informants mentioned that the different crises are key drivers in the process. So the mapping I presented here, I hope I could illustrate through the examples a few initiatives and a few examples of what we considered to be agroecological initiatives, and I think they can, of course, serve as an inspiration to further develop agroecology in Europe. And that's all from me. I want to thank you for your attention. And of course, I saw that some names of my key informants, and I want to thank you all for participating in this study.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this very nice presentation, which summarized well. But as you said, also there's much more behind also. You just could illustrate some initiatives, but I think this gives a good overview. Now I want to quickly give the word to Gerald Schwarz from the Thünen Institute. He's in fact, he's in the other CSA project, and they also do a mapping, but more focused on living labs and research infrastructures. And so he was happy to join in today and provide also additional information from the other project, which is, they did just the work on Germany, so that's why he will just speak about Germany today. Please, Gerald, I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks for the invitation. I will just share my screen. Hoping that this will work. Okay.
Yeah, it's now we see the screen full. Yeah, good.
Okay, super. Yeah, so thanks a lot again, and welcome everybody. And thanks a lot also for the introduction, Alexander. As you already introduced, I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the insights, well, initial insights from the mapping in Germany that we did in the Already project. And in the Already project, one of the main objectives really is also to develop and prepare a kind of European network of agroecology living labs and research infrastructures. And I think that also informed a little bit the approach that we took to the design of the mapping that we did. So as I think you already also said, Anna, we shared the mapping across the countries. I think also in Already we are mapping 22 or 23 countries as well. And we started in a way with the survey among national contact points. So we defined a small number of contact points in each country, trying to make sure that we represent policies, so contact points at the ministry, from the science and from the society domains. And then really those national contact points were then the kind of entry points into the mapping activities and into the mapping exercise. Through this process then to generate insights on the different experiences and various drivers on transitions to agroecology, and in particular looking and identifying a set of initiatives, living labs and research infrastructures that we are now doing more in-depth work on through questionnaires and interviews that are coming. I will come back to that in a minute. So in the initial mapping exercise with the national contact points, we focused in a way on a set of key themes, the kind of understanding of agroecology, the implementation of agroecological practices, the research and innovation system, how it's aligned with transitions to agroecology, the extent it's considered, the competences for agroecological transition, the involvement of stakeholders, and we also looked at the policies in support of agroecology. But really, this is, as I said, with the entry point to get a first overview and then to identify initiatives where we would go in the weeks currently and in the coming weeks into further depth. So maybe this presentation is not really an outlook for agroecology in Germany, but maybe rather presenting maybe a few issues that we can add to the discussion based on the very nice and detailed overview that Anna already provided for AE4EU. So let me start with a few points on the understanding of agroecology and the implementation of agroecological practices. I think we heard already about the kind of, well, dominant view by many on agroecology in Germany as a science, and the strong tradition and linkage to organic farming. But I think what was highlighted in the interviews with our national counterpoint really is the importance of the kind of integrated view on agroecology, combining practices, science, and the social movement. One aspect that was then raised is that the terminology and the understanding maybe also of the terminology when it comes to social movement really could also provide in a way or be a kind of critical bottleneck for the overall acceptance of agroecology, and also for, let's say, making further progress in the transition of agroecology. Because when it comes to some of the key actors in the farming sector, that would be immediately associated with a kind of negative impact in terms of economic values and farm income. And that already highlights really, and I will come back to that in a minute, the importance of addressing the economic barriers also to progress with transitions to agroecology. One point raised in addition to that is then that really the importance of broadening the discussion to raise the awareness also on not only the impacts on specific farms or at farm level, but the wider social, environmental, economic benefits of transitions to agroecology. So to also really use this in terms of engaging with society and raising awareness. Also, we touched on in the interviews on regional variations and the implementation of agroecological practices. Farming sector, farming structures are quite different in Germany across the different regions, and that also is mirrored in a way in the implementation of agroecological practices across the different regions, with the smaller farm structures in the south and southwest, and the large field structures in some of the northern or northeast areas. In addition to, let's say, the more agronomic or farm level practices, emphasized was the particular importance also of social practices and also social elements of agroecology and the value chain aspects that I will pick up on the next few slides as well. And one additional aspect that was raised was the kind of clothing the system across different regions. So for example, nutrient recycling, and really to look at issues and problems that transitions can address, not only for specific regions, but that there are some challenges and problems that need to be addressed that requires a look across different regions. And here maybe also the importance when we look at living labs, for example, to look at living labs at larger scale that are not only in a very particular region or territory, but really to jointly address issues across the different agroecological zones that was highlighted. On the research and innovation system, again, several issues that were highlighted. When it comes to the research programs, I think there was general feeling that the awareness and intention to address transitions to agroecology is reflected, but again, a kind of stronger integration of social components also in the research, and the focus on the knowledge system of agroecological transitions was highlighted. And when it came to financial resources, what was suggested here is a stronger shift in a way in the kind of paradigm and research funding, really to look into the long-term research on systemic changes and improvements of transitions to agroecology. So the kind of integration of the different aspects that need to be captured here. And talking about capturing, then also, because again, the diversity of farmers across Germany, there are a growing number of initiatives that also integrate the needs of specific farming communities, but really to understand the diversity of the needs, or the needs of the diversity of the farmers requires more attention. That was highlighted there as well. On the living labs aspects more specifically, I think that what we see, and we see this also through the number of initiatives that also Anna showed in the previous presentation, clearly living labs and other forms of open innovation arrangements, multi-actor involvement is increasing in agroecological research. And it was clearly acknowledged also that the activities of the research informing practice, but more, well, there's room for strengthening also the flow, the information flow, basically from practice to inform research. So those different directions of information flow was not seen evenly. There's a good basis for research infrastructures on transitions to agroecology with different research farm networks and research initiatives. But again, the role of social innovations and improving knowledge systems and also the aspects of the governance to transitions to agroecology was highlighted here, and also the kind of strengthening networks and better linking across the different federal states. Some quick words on the competences for agroecology transitions. In terms of education, one of the issues highlighted is that education in agriculture colleges is often focused on traditional themes of conventional farming, so themes that more reflect principles and elements of agroecology need to be better integrated, and for vocational education really to be improved. And I think what was highlighted here also, that does not only refer specifically to agroecology, but also to other sustainability, to other aspects and initiatives of sustainability, sustainable farming, like carbon farm, for example. Nevertheless, there was clearly a recognition that smaller education initiatives on agroecology exists. A particular point that was highlighted on the knowledge networks was the kind of cross-fertilization that is needed. So to bring together, let's say, agroecological and organic farmers with conventional farmers to really have that co-learning and exchange in those networks that could be one of the aspects to be further strengthened, and also then as part of the co-learning and knowledge aspects that are needed for strengthening or for promoting transitions. What was also highlighted was that knowledge requests from farmers to advisors are changing more towards systemic issues. Again, the examples of nutrient cycling was raised, so it moves a little bit away from specific management issues, but nevertheless, more tailored advice modules on sustainable farming practices were seen as particularly helpful. When it comes then to the involvement of stakeholders, well, one of the issues that I think we also deal with in our research projects, and of course, part of the multi-actor engagement and the Living Lab initiatives have initiated in our research projects. So really the kind of stakeholder fatigue, to be careful with that and to conduct stakeholder analysis on their involvement. A particular aspect here that was raised again in terms of also the scale of the engagement, that it is easier to involve stakeholders at the smaller scale, with the linkage to addressing specific problems that foster engagement, so that the specificity of issues that foster the buy-in of different actors and also from the whole value chain. And again, when we think here about a European network of living labs and research infrastructures, what was highlighted then, that in particular, this requires very careful thinking and identification of the benefits of such network then for the stakeholders across the different scales. We talked about in the interviews about, or we asked our national contact points to identify maybe particular stakeholder groups that are not sufficiently involved in agroecological transitions, or where there is room for more involvement, and where there is a need for strengthening the involvement. And what was raised here was in particular the improving the linkages between producers, consumers, and a stronger involvement of the different value chain actors, including retailers. And again, that really links back to the economic barriers that we heard before in terms of value added and income. A particular aspect was also to involve stakeholders who are impacted on by agricultural land management. That also referred here to smaller groups, maybe who are not necessarily always represented in living labs or in multi-actor engagement. The examples of fishermen was raised here, impacted on by changes in water quality. And then in addition to the composition of the stakeholders, also the role of living labs and the increased research and use of living labs in Germany on the decision-making process with the stakeholders. So to use those living labs as framework to test different governance settings and designing and conducting research on agroecological transitions. Again, the aspect of long-term funding, but what was raised here that also in Germany would be good to have more information and evidence available on good practices in living lab development and application, and that this is linked to the need for really developing indicators to measure the impact of living labs, and that's also linked to the activities that we are doing now in the Already project with the further analysis of the living lab initiatives to identify good practices and really to define what good practices entails in the different aspects. And just to close the last aspect, to briefly pick up when it comes to policies and support of agroecology. Of course, the critical role of the Common Agriculture Policy was highlighted both with positive and negative impacts. Negative impacts in terms of the area support, positive impact in terms of incentives for particular beneficial practices and particular targeting. Also here, reference to result-based approaches were made. So the example that we saw earlier would fit with that quite nicely. In addition to that, regulations banning harmful practices, but what also was highlighted, the detrimental effects of existing regulations that led to more market concentration, so were counterproductive to maybe what we would like to see in agroecological transition. The example here referred to small dairy producers, cheese producers that were forced out of business due to some of the particular regulations. The different strategies in Germany, I think we also heard about in the previous presentation about already sustainable development strategy, national bioeconomy strategy were also raised, and really as key themes of support to address those barriers of transition, to foster the knowledge exchange and awareness raising and the capacity building, and here also for policy stakeholders. And I think that relates to the role of living labs and research infrastructures in agroecology transitions, but also to specific aspects in relation to agroecology understanding and definitions, and the need for bringing together the different sides from the producers, the consumers, also within policy, the kind of food system strategy and approach. So to close, just a quick outlook based on the initial interviews with the national contact points and the mapping. We have now not only in Germany, but across the different countries, kind of inventory of initiatives and funding organizations that we are now continuing to work with. Just some of the examples here on the slide, and we are now the colleagues from INRAE have developed a questionnaire on characteristics with the aim to identify good practices that is currently being filled by living lab initiatives, research infrastructures in Germany and other countries, and then followed up by interviews with selected initiatives to get a more in-depth understanding of the different characteristics, and also when it comes to the benefits and the benefits of a European network, to look more into that, and based on that, then to analyze the network governance with the European pilot network in the Already project. And with that, I close just again the project website with all the links to the social media, and if further questions on the project to the coordinating and management team at INRAE, Heather and Ophélie. So many thanks for your attention. And I hope, yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for also providing your information you collected so far about Germany. Well, we know mapping is an ongoing thing. We never can say it's finished. So if we continue in 2 years, we will have new insights and maybe also good changes into the direction, more research, long-term research funded or other things. But we just can see it as a current situation, what was mapped with the two initiatives, the two projects. So we just have to keep this in mind. And I think the same for your project and our is that we will not be able to provide a complete holistic overview about everything, because it's often not easy to say, is it agroecological or not initiative or something, because not everybody uses the term already. So yeah, it's still, I think, a lot of things which can be investigated and researched in the next years on the development of agroecology. But thanks a lot, Gerald, also to sharing the insights from your mapping exercise in Germany.
Yep. Thanks.
Which I think, what would be the next slide now? Maybe Kira share again.
It's me that chat, but time for exchange. I think that was the next slide. Just to provide a space for question, maybe before we go to the last slide of the presentation, if you agree.
Because the last slide is just on the outlook, no, on the future. Or what?
On the next step, if you want to, we can quickly present that and then.
Yeah, maybe we quickly present that and then we open the discussion. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, you can do it, Baptiste. Yeah.
No, it was just to share with you. So very briefly, 3 information. First, other webinar will be planned in the near future, 1 or 2 before the end of June on other European countries. As I mentioned during the introduction, we want to publish the country report not as single report, but through different volume of open access book that will summarize the information that we partly share with you today regarding Germany and Austria. And also I will share it on the chat as well, but we wanted to provide you a space apart from our direct exchange that will start now, to provide us your remark, observation, or even further question. And so I will share this link, but this will be for the end of the webinar. And now we really wanted to have a direct exchange with you at first. And yeah, as you have seen, we try also to make some publicity about our project. So here you can find again the link for our website and also the Twitter account. So now I will stop sharing my screen to leave space for an exchange with you.
Okay, good. Now the floor is open for questions, and I see there were already some coming in. I couldn't follow completely the chat because I was taking attention to the presentations. So I know
we had so sorry for the spelling of the name, but if you want to ask directly your question, so the first one was from José Luis Vicente from Zalf in Germany, if I'm not wrong. José Luis, if you want to ask directly your question, you can. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Hi.
Hi. Thank you very much. Yeah. I don't want to read my my comment on the chat, but just basically, I had two questions. One related to the concept of regenerative farming, because we visit here. I mean, yeah, I'm working in for Zalf. Zalf is located not so far from Berlin, so we cover more or less Brandenburg, a little bit of Saxony. And we visit some CSA farms. So our question was, are they agroecological and not, and how they apply the different agroecological practices? And we visit them. Actually, this morning we were visiting them, and then they very often mention the concept of regenerative farming, and they don't know the concept of agroecology. We mention agroecology, but they they get confused, and they are much more familiar now, at least, I don't know in other countries, but at least I think in Germany, they are more used now with the concept of regenerative farming. I don't know, how it is reflected in your results, because I think that even though it is not, you cannot find so many papers in the scientific literature, but I think that outside the scientific system, I see the farmers really into the topic. And yeah, and I don't remember my other my second
I think that's
question.
good already. Maybe we can already answer this. I don't know, maybe Anna first, if you got some people speaking about regenerative agriculture approaches, and then I can complement more generally about agroecology and regenerative agriculture as a seen in different countries and all over the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to go this way. I would say that most key informants use the term of regenerative agriculture. At some point on the interview, one question was, do you know any similar concepts or related concepts? And there definitely was the mention of regenerative agriculture that often came. I would say also in Austria, it's a term that is used and more known sometimes than agroecology itself. But the same as agroecology, that's maybe my personal view on this topic, is that it's a concept that is quite broad and not well defined and understood and interpreted differently by each stakeholder.
Okay, if we go to the regenerative agriculture, well, this was initially used 20 years ago by the Rodale Institute in the United States, which did long-term research on soil fertility and soil health regarding organic agriculture. So that's, let's say, that's a little bit the starting point. And since then, there are not much scientific publications. There are many things on the internet you find now, and it's coming up more and more in the last years, and especially coming. Well, at the beginning, it was only that was strongly restricted to all about sustainable soil fertility and soil practices. And now there are proponents which also enlarge it a little bit to our connection to consumers and going into the food system. So, but they're really more recent in the last years. And one thing why it's expanding a little bit more also in the last years in Europe, but especially also in the United States, it's that it's quite driven by the agribusiness, because that's a term which is not connotated with ecology inside. And some we know, some companies in Germany, in France, for example, they want to have sort of a labeling regarding regenerative practices. And I know also from companies in Italy, and it's more easily to use this term than agroecology. And agroecology or agroecological practices, for example, in Germany, is not well defined yet. So that's, and in the US, for example, you cannot really speak. I was there last year, 2 months, and you cannot really speak much about agroecology there or agroecological practices. They just speak about regenerative practices. So it's there are many elements now which are similar. Mainly it was restricted to more soil fertility management, but now it's also expanding, and some agribusiness company want to include it in labeling probably some of their products.
Thanks. Just we had also another question. So sorry, José Luis, maybe you wanted to react, but I think that's good.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay. I had another question, but I think that my colleagues are also have other questions. So yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so we had also a question from Joanna that work at ISARA and also ZALF. After that, on digitalization and agroecology, Joanna, maybe you want to ask it directly.
Yes, thank you, Baptiste. Good afternoon to everyone. My question was on digitalization. So basically in Germany, we see quite some push in digital approaches that like robotics, sensors, digital decision support systems, which can facilitate in some ways the uptake of agroecology, its implementation, but also it's claimed that they can facilitate its valorization. So we heard in both projects that result-oriented policy measures came up. And I wanted to hear your take on that. Do you think that digitalization and agroecology are like a good fit for one another?
You will open here a debate for 1.5 hours, maybe, if we go on this. Well,
That
there
was
is
my aim.
Well, there is a funding. There was a call for funding at the European level, so there should be now a new CSA or soon signed, I guess, for agroecology and digitalization. And many people are asking now about, well, what type of digital tools or digitalization can be in alignment with agroecology or not, and there are quite contrasting views. So there can be some which can help, of course, to monitoring better biodiversity or other things, and others see it more with stomach ache and saying, if we say precision agriculture is bringing a lot for agroecology because we can even place even better a little bit fertilizers or pesticides, and with this reducing the inputs. So there are these two different fields, which proponents and think that's a big thing which can be done with digitalization, and others which have more constrained view, and especially one is about patent and open use of this technology, if it's available for everybody, to which prices, and if there is not for certain things like sensors and others, again, these big power of the companies which are developing it. So I think that's the most said very quickly, the more contrasting things.
So then we had, so just to answer to one comment, we will exchange until 5:30, but just as I mentioned, we will share with you a link where you can leave comments and question after. So after that, there was a question of Graziano Sedia from the GRC on the limits and the dichotomy between agroecology as a science and practice and as a movement. But yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot for the interesting contribution. Yes, this dichotomy seems to me to be very prominent. On one hand, agroecology as a science practice, and then as a social movement. And I see that this is related also to scale. So as a science and as a practice, the focus is on individual, practices, intercropping or whatever, and they are assessed at a field level, household level, how they affect yields, income, nutrition, diversity. And this is all deemed scientific, which it is. I'm not saying it is. And that's as soon as we look at a larger scale and we bring in the need, or we question the configuration of the existing food system, and this is a more systemic, if you want, macro perspective, then all these gets, in my opinion, put into this social movement box. And I cannot help but feel that this characterization of a social movement, it's a bit derogative in the sense it's not as good as the scientific evidence. And I wonder, how can we avoid maybe falling into this trap? Because the study of, if you want, societal transformation is an important scientific field in itself. So to be labeled as somebody who argues for the transformation of food system, say, oh no, it's just some activists. I think this can be very derogative. So, how can we avoid maybe falling for this trap and claim the scientific validity of the call for, if you want, a transformation of the food system? This is a question for both speakers or for anybody who feels that wants to answer.
I don't know if Gerald, you want to give a first answer? I pushed you over.
That's fine. I can make a start, and maybe others can jump in, because I think that's an important point that Graziano is raising. And I see that problem too, that there is a tendency to immediately, just classify this as social movement when we talk about linking producers and consumers as part of transdisciplinary research and as part of transforming food systems. But I think that's a critical aspect, in particular if we want to go maybe with transitions to agroecology beyond certain niche or beyond a certain stage. If we, mainstreaming is maybe not a really good term, but if we want to make further progress, then that really becomes critical. But I think, and maybe my observation is just wrong, but I have the impression that there is more and more research published on those kind of aspects. And I think with the increasing importance to that kind of research, also the let's say the public discourse on that will change. And looking into the future, we will have two partnerships coming up, hopefully, the one on agroecology and the one on food systems. And I think what you also raise with your question again is the importance of linking those two. And really making sure that there are cross-cutting issues that are addressed. So I think that would be my reply to that, Alexander, and now I stop.
Anna, do you want to add here something, or?
No, I don't really.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's because it's not an easy thing. I would say yes, I really can go with what Grard was saying, because on the one side it was at the beginning of the social movement and then the science, but we know many social movements also produce science, so citizen science, farmer science, and they bring in also forward things which are then taken up by research. And if we take examples from Cuba, for example, so the social movements, so the campesino to campesino movement, which brought forward a lot of changes and transition towards agroecology, and now also researching on these social movements and how they functioned is coming more in and in. And I think if we want to really have a transition towards agroecology, the social movements, they will play and should play a big role in it. And so it's always a question, how can we combine good here, the research or the science part with the social movements? Because sometimes it's both are a little bit afraid of the others, because, well, a different language, a different approaches, and we won't see I know for some social movements, they see science as not reliable completely, because it's not grounded sufficiently on the ground and farmers' fields, and it's farmers mainly which produce knowledge over centuries. I mean, the major advancement at the beginning came not from science, they came from farmers themselves, and how they still and today are innovative and practice new things. And sometimes science is following up and trying to explain, and sometimes science finds new things which farmers then apply. So I think it's a combination of two which can bring us much further on the transition towards agroecology. Maybe Erika, I see just there was a raised hand. Maybe she has a response directly to this. And Donia also. Okay, now we have a topic where.
No, I have another question. Sorry, I'm not with the topic directly. Thanks.
Okay, but then go ahead. You are now on.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I have a question, but maybe it's not completely directed with the topic. It's for Gerald too. Thanks, Gerald and Anna, for the presentation. And I was wondering about this stakeholder fatigue that you mentioned, and also for Anna. I would like to know what do you think, or what do you find like the main causes of these things, and how we can reduce in the future? Thinking that agroecology transition, and I mean, you need a lot of participation of the stakeholders, and it's quite obvious that they are quite tired sometimes. So yeah, what could be the future directions to reduce this stakeholder fatigues and the causes that you find in the process of mapping these different living labs or the different initiatives? Thanks.
You want me to respond to that, Alexander? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Erika. I just to clarify. I mean, I did not mean to say that there is a very high stakeholder fatigue in the process, but there is a danger of stakeholder fatigue, and I think we see this from personal experience with various projects in multi-actor engagement, and sometimes you hear let's say notes about having a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion fora that are taking place at the same time, and a lot of initiatives. So I think that really the the stakeholder analysis and really to be clear on who to engage for which activities and to be clear about what's their benefit, that's probably quite an important element there. And maybe this is only indirectly related to stakeholder fatigue because but there's also maybe a more technical aspect on on how we engage them in terms of how we remunerate them for their time. That again is really an important aspect that has an impact on that. And that in particular, I think applies to farmers who immediately have costs of their time if they take part in initiatives and if it is not directly impacting on benefiting their business or their farm. So there are different aspects there, I think, but maybe I also let others jump in. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, is there immediately a follow-up remark on this by somebody? If not, I see Donia with the raised hand, and then I give back to Baptiste because he's following. I think I'm jumping a little bit the order, but I give first the word to Donia, and then Baptiste has to tell me who's next with the questions.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Donia. I just missed the first three. I don't have a question, but I wanted to ask something. I did miss the first 3 minutes. I didn't know if you, I think it would be very insightful and it will be enriching for the literature of the first part of the report. I know it's not published yet, but it's very insightful for all of us to have like a history of the concept, because it's a very evolving concept, agroecology. And the problem with researcher, when we read about it, like Anna said, it's about everyone has his own definition. And there is agroecology, there is regenerative agriculture, there is the food sovereignty, there is the agriculture ecosystem word, ecological system. And I think that it will be very enriching if in the literature review to have like a part to incite all of us on the evolving nature of agroecology and how it recoups and it joins all the other concepts and enriches the other concepts already existing. And I think it will be a very, if it doesn't exist, it will be very enriching and insightful for the literature, actual literature now.
Okay, yeah, that's a good comment, and I think many people would like also something which is summarized quickly, but it's not so easy, I tell you. And I'm working on this in 15 years now also, and also this historical development of agroecology in different countries. So one thing maybe to visit for you quickly, I mean, for a good overview, is the HLPE report about agroecological approaches and other innovations. So that was issued by some experts which were working for the World Committee for Food Security, and they made a report in 2019, and there is the first chapter which summarizes and gives a broad overview about the development of agroecology and how some definitions used. I think this can summarize quite quickly, and then there are many other papers, but if we list them today, then you will be overwhelmed with reading in the next month.
Thank you.
Okay, Baptiste, now tell me which one.
Yeah, there was a question from, and sorry again for my pronouncing of the name, but Emily Poppenborg regarding Living Lab and the use of the mobilization of the concept linked to agroecology.
Okay,
so
yeah.
maybe Emily, yes, you can directly ask your question as well or remark.
Yes, hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you everyone for the talks and the presentations. It's all really interesting to listen in. And I was just wondering a lot specifically on the question of the living labs. So I know that you're basically mapping these right now and that they tend to be very diverse and that this is really quite open into what a living lab is or will be in the future, where they will pop up, who will be managing them and so on. But I am wondering how much you know about where and whether these will be somehow standardized, whether we will have some kind of framework for what is in a living lab and how these are defined. Are there some criteria? can we even think about obtaining some kind of monitoring and evaluation framework of what is happening in the living labs over time and how well improvements are happening, how fast things are going depending on what's being done in different labs? And whether we can even consider making these into, well, in Germany, we might call this a Schwerpunktprogramm type of organization, where you can apply for research projects to run within the network of living labs and try to run these in a standardized way, making use of the huge network of stakeholders this will involve. So I don't know, maybe I wondered if you have some thoughts about how this might develop in the future.
May I give the first word to Gerald, because they are specifically also living labs, but when Anna and I can complete also. But there is not a central, I think, one guide which you can easily use now, but there are indications. But Gerald, please, first you.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander, and thanks, Emily, for the question. Well, I don't think, I guess the living lab concept, the way we understand it as a broader concept, is for good reasons, because it's about co-innovation, and I guess co-innovation requires some flexibility also in the way we design it. But well, my understanding is there are principles that have been defined for living labs, that the user-centric, the co-innovation, the real-world context, all those different aspects are basically key elements or principles of a living lab, or how you would define a living lab. I think when it comes to agroecology living labs, that's something where I would think that the work we are doing now and already, and I suppose also in AE4EU, in terms of looking into the characteristics of the different initiatives, will further contribute to that by getting a better understanding on how the different living labs that we now collect the information from the in-depth questionnaires relate to different principles, to different dimensions of agroecology. And based on that data collection analysis, to come up with maybe some kind of typology or classification of agroecology living labs, and defining some key characteristics that are then maybe linked to good practices that can be defined. And as I briefly touched on in the presentation, that requires then some indicators to be developed alongside in order to do the monitoring. And then the monitoring, what would the monitoring cover? The monitoring would cover, I guess, some of the ecological aspects that we want to achieve with agroecological transitions. But I guess since it is a living lab and it's about innovations and co-learning, it would also need to monitor the kind of processes of the engagement of the different actors within the living labs. So that becomes quite a complex monitoring systems that we are basically would need here. So I think this is, well, my understanding that for already this is work in progress. And once the questionnaires are done, the interviews are done and analyzed, I think that will inform that. And I think the colleagues from INRAE, I see that Heather is also here in the webinar, and Muriel and Bastian, they are working on this, and maybe also Heather can come in and if she wants to add something on that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I hope I answered the question at least a little bit. I know it's a difficult one. Sorry.
Anna, your experience regarding the living labs, because you had also, I think, difficulty sometimes to define what is the living lab and how they also, the stakeholders, see it.
Yes, it was quite difficult to select and to decide whether an initiative was a living lab or not. What we mappers did is base ourselves on what our key informants actually said, and then with some certain criteria that it should be either a network or regrouping at least a certain number of people, not just maybe one farm, that there should be some sort of innovative approach, a participative approach to reach that innovation, and what Gerard just said, some sort of monitoring also throughout the living lab. that should take place. But this remains very broad, and I know that between mappers we talked a lot about should we add this or not, should we consider this or not as a living lab. And I think our work would at least help then further on define the concept more.
Yes, thanks. I think looking at the time, we continue with other questions.
Yes, there was a question on the chat from Maurice regarding the use of the term of agroecology. So I don't know, Maurice, if you want to raise your question directly, otherwise I can read it.
Yeah, maybe
do it directly, yes.
Yeah, maybe it's not that absolute important at the moment for this discussion, but maybe it is. The term is already used in German language, agroecology, for a specific discipline. So sometimes in discussions, you talk about different things, and then it's very difficult, and you always spend at least 1 hour to find out where the people are talking about, and then you have half an hour to speak about how to develop it further. And that's why my critical maybe question, why should we not rename it? I mean, if the name is already used, if the term is used already, why should we try to squeeze some meaning into it that others don't see? Yeah, it's just an open question.
Yeah, maybe I respond there. I think it's well, because we did once an analysis about the evolution and the development of agroecology in different countries in the historical perspective, and it's not that somebody really can say this is agroecology and this is not. It's the people in the countries, and if there was more the movement more present or the science, so this brought in different interpretations, and that's, I think, the big difficulty today. And as you said, well, or as we said, for Germany, it was always very strongly driven in the last 80 years, because the first publications on agroecology in Germany are 80 years ago. They came mainly from science, but in other countries it's different. So there is no right or wrong, I must mean, or say, who is completely right? Well, we see a certain convergence, of course, today, what is under agroecology, but many stakeholders and from different countries has, I don't want to call it a limited view, but from their perspective, they only see some elements, or they concentrate on some elements of agroecology. And this makes it so difficult starting a discussion about agroecology with somebody. I can tell you, when starting working in France 16 years ago, it took me 2 years to understand what the French were speaking about agroecology when I was discussing with them. Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry, yeah, please.
Maybe we just, yeah, I mean, I think there's no need to spend ages on like defining this. We should think forward, but maybe it's important if you are mapping and you find that certain groups of people don't use the term, then you don't need to be surprised, let's say, because it's just, it is used from another group. Yeah. And maybe there are like organic farmers that have some agroecological practices in their mind and on their farms, and they would probably, so if we would not use agroecology but something else, maybe then we would talk about the same thing. And that's very relevant if you are mapping and if you say there is something present or not. I just want to create some awareness that for that issue.
Okay, good. Yeah. I think I saw the hand of Erika. Thanks, Moritz. Another question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have a question is regarding to the culture. If you identify, Gerald, Alexander, and Anna, if you identify some specific topics or aspects that we have to consider for the German speakers like Austria and Germany in this process of agroecology, living labs that are related with the culture. For example, if you want to evaluate something, there are some things that should be considered according to the culture per se of the German speaker countries, or this is basically most of the same. I don't know, it's more like thinking a little bit about this for the external observators or for external monitoring, if we should consider some cultural aspects for this. So agroecology and also for living labs.
Anna, please, and then I can say also something. If you have something to add, Anna.
it's a difficult question. I'm not sure I can say I observed anything, but as Moritz said, the Agroecology has a very specific definition, or very, in most people's view, scientists' view, it's a science and it's nothing more, or it's not defined differently than a science in Germany. I don't think it's a cultural thing, but it's just the way it developed in Germany.
And yeah, I think it's really different from country to country. And while there are quite some examples from Italy and other countries where the culture behind and the way of and the tradition behind and the way of producing is more and more strongly related and included in agroecological research. And if you look also at the HLP report, one of the 13 principles is culture and diets. So that's the link to the larger food system, and where these cultural aspects can become very important for a specific production way, and the identity of the territory behind for producing something which is a little bit different to the mainstream conventional system, and can even provide identity for the whole territory and for the farmers, and product quality, and then related back, of course, to diets. But this is not easy to answer your question also so quickly. But there are more and more papers now also dealing with this question of agroecology and cultural identity and diversity. Baptiste, who is next on your list? I don't know in the chat if there are more questions.
Maybe one last question from Maria Luisa and maybe for Anna regarding how do we select the initiatives, and also maybe the key informants, but more on the initiatives. For Maria Luisa Paracini.
If I can just, it's
yeah,
Maria
of
Luisa.
Course, yes.
Sorry,
Maria Luisa, come in.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. First, thank you for the presentations. I was wondering, listening to the presentation, on how do you decide if an initiative is in or out? Because you may look at agroecology as a system or as practices. In the first case, I presume it's more clear. In the second case, you may have nuances, but at a certain moment, you have to decide if an initiative is in or out of the accounting for the project. And for the example I make in the question is that you may have the application of agro-environmental measures to aimed at biodiversity conservation, but that would not necessarily imply that you also have the uptake of some basic agroecological principles such as nutrient recycling or other principles. So this was not fully clear to me how the decision is taken.
Yes, so the decision was based on two criteria. So one of them being that key informants had to mention the initiatives, multiple key informants, and the second criteria was that the initiative should have a certain should have started, I think we said 2018, no more than, the initiative shouldn't be more recent than 3 years, so that we could already see if it had impacts, what work they did, and could analyze the work they did. But we did not use a specific grid looking if they respect the agroecological principles or not. It's also quite difficult because the agroecological principles, there's no initiatives that actually follows everyone. I did not find at least an initiative that has this holistic approach. They do cover most of them, but then it's also difficult to say up to what point do they follow the principles, or what does it mean to follow a principle.
If I may just add one more point, I always wonder when I hear this sentence, there is no agreed definition, if we can either come to an agreed definition or bypass the problem somehow, because this is I see it as a big bottleneck, because I continuously hear this sentence, and I see it as a sort of wall that is even preventing the debate to go forward. So one idea I had is that maybe we could agree on the principles at the global scale, even at the Commission with the discussions on our support to developing countries, and within the coalition on agroecology, we are trying to move in that direction. So to say that we take the HLP principles and the FAO10 elements as a reference. At least we have some grounds for a common agreement, and then we can go forward in our work, theoretical and practical.
Yes, I think that's an important point. Well, I think we will never come to a complete agreement, but we, as I said before, we come to a certain convergence towards similar definitions used by many stakeholders, but we will never have it by all stakeholders because there are different interests. And I think that's typical for the world. But relating it back to the principles, I think that's a good thing. And I saw already now some publications starting to doing this and always looking at, well, different initiatives or programs or cases and looking, well, can we tick one of these 13 principles? And I think it's difficult to say that we have to have at least 10 out of 13, then it's good. And if we have 9, it's not good. But at least you can check a little bit which ones are present. And depending if these examples from agroecology come more from the food system or more from the production side area, then you have more principles in or out, because for some which are more just for the agroecosystems level, for example, then these food systems principles which are related in culture and diets and governance and social equity and other things, they are probably less important and often not mentioned and not clearly stated. But I think it's a good point to relate it to the principle. And I just saw in the chat that somebody said that they relate also, well, they've chosen about 60 indicators, but they always check against the 13 principles. But again, I'm thinking we will not have a 100% agreed definition, but if you look at but more convergence towards something, and in the agroecology partnership as it is prepared at the moment, and it takes, I know so far, you see also that this is coming more to a common agreement for many, many stakeholders. Okay, Baptiste, is there any last question remaining?
Not that I know of, but I think as we are already 8 minutes late regarding the timing, maybe it's time for us to conclude this webinar. I will just reshare the link where you can leave us some comments and also the link to our website if you want to have information regarding the project.
Yeah, so please just go quickly to the link and take another 2 or 3 minutes and leave some comments which were not possible. Well, for the discussion round, I know I cut it a little bit. We cannot always ask back from others, but that was, well, the idea was to quickly respond to most of the questions at least. A very great thank to Anna and to Grard, which presented these insights from Germany and Austria, and also the different questions from the different participants with the broad diversity of questions. And I'm happy if we can see each other in a few weeks, as we want to carry out other webinars then with examples from different countries. The next one will be maybe the Mediterranean or more Eastern Europe, because there we have already some country reports, and that's areas or countries, not the Mediterranean, but more Eastern Europe, where much less is known, at least related to the term agroecology. Thanks again a lot for everybody, also for Baptiste for preparing this, and Kira, and also for your participation. And enjoy the evening.